to what degree can artificial intelligence or machine learning, can those inform training practices? And what scenarios or what applications or data sets could be useful, if at all? This question asker asked, machine learning and AI in data-driven strength training, ? So I interpret that as asking, to what degree can artificial intelligence or machine learning, which I'm probably not your guy to differentiate between the two, but, to what degree can those inform training practices? And what scenarios or what applications or data sets could be useful, if at all?
Man, there's so many different ways you could take this question. I mean, first and foremost, like you said, we are not the machine learning and AI experts, the people with boots on the ground creating large language models and ultimately dealing with those types of problems. I have a ton of respect for, and I think that's going to probably be one of the biggest, revolutionary aspects of our generation when we kind of look back in the history textbooks in the next 50, 100 years.
Oh, so now you're a history expert.
Yeah, exactly,
Okay,
right.
cool.
Look at this. Podcast creep, right? You start doing
Exactly.
podcasts, I start talking about, all kinds of different things. But anyway, to me, I'll kind of put this under the umbrella of just how can we utilize maybe a more data-aware or data-centric approach to improve practice overall. And so this is where you just kind of get into the various different ways we can get really big data sets, similar to like other fields, like medicine and things like that. If you just think about the way that systems are designed in medicine and things like that, they're all contingent upon very, very clear and concise ways to consolidate large amounts of information, large amounts of data. You think about the way, patient information is prescribed or conscribed during a doctor's visit, things like that. There's just so many ways of which strength training is kind of behind a lot of those fields to just get massive amounts of information that you can start to make inferences from. So I think that's starting to change. I think people are starting to become more interested in how we could potentially evolve these questions and these abilities. And so that's where things like training apps and ultimately that just gives you access to more information. But I think to me, the more interesting thing that I'm personally wondering where the innovation is going to come from is the development of what I would call just the outcome aspect of the problem. So to me, just from a very, very high level, these types of integrations require something to kind of drive them, and having clear outcomes for these applications or these large data sets to guide whatever we're asking the AI to ultimately inform. I think that's the hardest part. So this is a basic example, hypertrophy. What are we asking that to ultimately inform our training based upon? Is it the progression of volume load on a couple exercises? Is it some sort of body scanning technology? Is it some sort of circumference and caliber kind of equation? Like there's so many different ways you could approach that. And then ultimately taking this massive consortium of data or information from these applications and trying to derive training principles from that. That seems like an interesting idea to me, but ultimately it still comes down to, can we define really good outcomes and then having a clear and systematic process to try to identify, whether it be training variables or whatever you're actually asking those technologies to help you with. It's just that there's so many different ways you could take it in terms of what you're trying to solve, that I think those are the couple things that come to my mind in terms of the big issues that currently need to be dealt with. But I don't know if you have any other kind of thoughts that go down there.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is, if you were to use, if you were to create a system, a quote unquote AI system that could improve your training prescriptions beyond alternatives. So whether that be like a template-based program, whether that be something that kind of uses, I guess what would probably be best described as like an expert system. So kind of rules that are baked into a programming system, such as our Infinity program system, or what a coach would prescribe to someone if they were to kind of start with an empty spreadsheet or an empty document and create a program. So if you were to theoretically have an AI system, you would want to make sure that it's better than those things, right? And you would kind of the first step is determining that it is better, when it's better, so that you can expedite the process of getting that better training for the user, right? And I think what you're pointing out is that in order to determine what is better, you need to quantify better, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's a lot harder than folks realize,
100%.
especially for hypertrophy, right? So if we've talked about this in recent episodes, and we'll probably continue this thread in forthcoming episodes, but like if you have training data from someone, how helpful is that for hypertrophy outcomes, right? Like there's a reason in the lab we don't just look at strength gains or volume load progression or a 10 rep max for hypertrophy, right? Now, maybe if you theoretically had enough data looking at the relationship between something like strength gains, when strength gains are informative of hypertrophy using ultrasound or MRI or some other sort of direct measurement of hypertrophy, then maybe at that point, you could get inferences from training data. But as it stands now, I think there's kind of two fundamental issues in my mind. The first is it's really hard to actually measure those outcomes. And secondly, there is a lack of subject matter expertise with a lot of things, or I should say a lack of subject matter knowledge. So a basic example is, to what degree do strength gains or volume load progression inform direct measurements of hypertrophy? Because you would have to imagine that some sort of AI model doesn't start completely from scratch. And I think that there are so many open questions in our field and so many limitations with our measurement tools, the durations we use, that at least in my mind, we are so far off from something like this actually being helpful that I think anything that does try to take this approach, at least from what I can envision from the tools available, is almost certainly going to be worse than those alternative options like a template, an expert system, or an actual coach. Then beyond that point, I think I start to think about what actually leads to the outcome of interest and how many of those things are even solvable by an AI model, right? Like, is human interaction...
The issue isn't people not knowing what to do.
Yeah.
Absolutely destroyed. But what I was going to say is that I don't think it's like very similar to nutrition in the sense that there's clearly an obesity crisis. But if you really ask people who struggle with obesity, I don't think the issue is that they don't really know what to eat.
Yeah.
It's more so the execution of those things. And I think it's the same thing with training, is like we can quibble over the details, of course, and there are obviously better ways to approach the problem than others, but like particularly within people within our niche, that's not the issue.
Is the reason you haven't reached your powerlifting potential because you're not squatting 3 times a week and you're squatting twice a week? Like, is that actually the reason? Or is it because of some things that might not going to an AI system, such as the degree to which you look forward to your training that day and the downstream effects that it has, and what factors lead you to being excited about training for the day, and therefore encourage you to set your training, your day up around your training, not in the sense that it is the main event of the day, but it is at least an important event of the day that gets a lot of mental headspace, and you kind of, put it in the time of the day that is best for performance, and not trying to squeeze it in before the gym closes, 10 o'clock at night. Those are the practical things that I think is just having coached since like 2018 or so. It's just like, these are things that I think maybe early on I was like, man, someday, coaches, they're not going to be needed. But I think I drift further and further away from that, even as AI gets better and better, and I use it more and more in my day-to-day life. And
those are the parts. Those are the parts of it that I have thought less about, but I think have higher upside, is if you are able to manufacture some of that human interaction aspect of things, and essentially could provide a coach to.
So if you were to take all my conversations from clients over the years,
exactly,
and basically create a model that's me, that would give the answer that I would give.
Yeah, but it's.
Do you think that would have the same effect?
It's the interpersonal part of that I'm talking about. It has the upside, like AI generated avatars, those kind of things. Like, it's just a whole different world on like what's theoretically possible in the very long term in terms of creating a coach that's willing to video call you at any time and can have that. You know what I mean? It's just like there is potential leverage on that if you can figure out the way to get that interpersonal contact behind the ChatGPT text response in the back of my mind when I think about this being applied, particularly in the context of training, is we're just so far behind the amount of data we've collected and the things and tools that we have relative to other fields that are just starting to make bedrock, like foundational, huge advancements with this kind of stuff. That I wonder if it's just going to take substantially longer. Too.
I tend to think these days programming is almost permissive to progress and not necessarily the thing that drives progress. Like obviously the training stimulus itself is necessary, but in a lot of ways it isn't sufficient once you get past a certain threshold. Yeah. So I think when a lot of people think of an AI model of some kind for training, you think of the X's and O's of training.
Yeah, the magic bullet of training.
The magic bullet of training. And I think that pales in comparison to a lot of the other things that are going to impact your progress. Like I care a lot more these days about what is our high level body weight plan. It's January of 2025. Okay, we're in a competition in July of 2025. I care a lot more about making sure we're bought in, executing, and we have a solid plan regarding how we're going to make weight for that meet, how we're going to potentially do a slow massing phase to fill out a weight class and executing that well. Those are the things that I think drive progress a lot more than slight improvements in the X's and O's. And we might get into this a little bit in the next question when we talk about like biggest learnings from 2024. But these days, I think exercise selection and individualization of exercise selection is probably one of the most important X's and O's. And I still think that could be in the AI realm, but that's probably quite a bit harder to do compared to the X's and O's themselves, right? Like ultimately, that's a long way of saying I think we are close enough in terms of RPE prescriptions, frequency prescriptions, volume prescriptions, periodization approaches, tapering practices. I think we are like well past even the 80-20 principle of that. I think the things that remain are a lot of the like less tangible things that I don't envision some sort of AI programming model doing even in the moderate term.